Hello, beautiful teachers, and welcome to another Vibrant Music Teacher Chat. This is your weekly show here on YouTube where we talk about all things music teaching. We do a special warm-up, a singing and a rhythm warm-up together to make some music as an online community, and then we talk about a special topic each week, and we do have our Ask Me Anything section at the end as well. So if you have a question today throughout today's show, you can just type the word question followed by your question, and I have a special hat reserved for that question time, so do ask me some questions so that I stay in the special hat, otherwise it'll only be on my head for a moment. Question followed by your question, and it can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about today's topic. Today's topic, however, is exams. So let me know your thoughts on piano exams. Do your students do them? Did you do them growing up? What's your experience been with them? We're going to talk about the pros and cons today and all things piano or music in general exams. Before we get to that though, let's do our warm-up. Okay, so we're going to start with our solfa warm-up today, our singing warm-up. This is part of Solfa Railroad Level 2, so it uses the pentatonic scale. When I do these with students, I go through and say the solfa before we start. I'm not going to do that today, but we will try we're just going to try the faster track right away. We'll give it a go. If you're not comfortable with solfa, that's totally fine. Just sing do, make up your own words, hum the tune, but do participate. It really does help to get you in a musical mindset for the day. Okay, so we're going to give it a go. This one is in 3/4, so there's going to be a tonic chord, starting note, and then 1 bar, so 3 beats of count in before you start. I didn't see that so la bit coming. La is much more awkward. Sorry, if you haven't been on the show before, I use this to practice my hand signs because I'm not so good at those. And I don't want to sing because it'll kind of mess you up a little bit. But la, it's just kind of awkward, isn't it? The la hand sign. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed seeing me muddle that up, and I hope you enjoyed singing along. We're going to do our rhythm warm-up next. So for this one, we have different actions to do. The light blue is going to be 1 hand tapping. The orange is going to be 2 hands or 1 hand on your shoulder, up to you. The heart is going to be hand on heart. Then what else do we have? The foot. So tap your foot. That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, this time let's try the slower one first, just so you can hear, and then we'll do the faster one after. Because it's in 3/4, there will be 2 bars, 2 measures of drumming before we actually start. Make sure to give it a go, even if you feel a bit silly, or even if you mess it up. We all mess it up sometimes. Very serene, that one, isn't it? Okay, let's try the faster version. Sorry for me looking off to the screen, by the way. I have to have that on a separate screen, obviously, so that's why I'm looking off to the side. Okay, I hope you gave that a go. If you did mess it up, don't worry about it. And don't worry if you're doing these with students and you mess it up. It's absolutely fine. They will giggle and you'll all move on or practice it some more together. By the way, I had a few questions about these recently, asking, can I buy these somewhere? And the only place they're available is inside the membership. So that's at vibrantmusicteaching.com, vibrantmusicteaching.com. That's it. Okay? There's nowhere else where you can buy them. Someone is asking them, like, can I purchase the books separately? Nope. only in the membership. It's one of the many membership bonuses. Okay, so today we are talking about piano exams and some of the pros and cons of piano exams. First of all, let's set this up though, because there's a big divide in the world. Most people outside the US, most teachers outside the US, have their students do exams most of the time. So this is the results for the UK from our most recent report, which was a couple of years ago now. We're due to do another one next year, but it still showcases this divide. So in the UK, almost all, like over 90% of the teachers just under 90% of the teachers have students do exams at least sometimes, and with almost 12% having them do them every year without question. And I've given the UK as an example here. It's sort of the highest, but Australia, New Zealand, Canada even, and certainly the Ireland within the EU, less so the rest of the EU, do have similar figures pretty close to this. Whereas in the US, we're looking at basically the inverse. We've got over 70% of teachers saying their students never ever do exams, and then around 20% saying sometimes, and then a much smaller number saying every year. So it's basically the opposite of what we just looked at in the UK. And I've seen this hold true for all my conversations with teachers. Often teachers in the US just haven't ever thought about it, or they know something about our exam system, but not really. It's definitely not the default to do them. It's the default not to do them. Whereas over here, and in lots of other parts of the English-speaking world, the default is to do exams with your students. And I'm the odd one out for not doing them with my students every year. Now, I do have my students sometimes do exams, because in my view, this view where the 70% never do exams, and this view where 80%, 90% at least sometimes do exams, they have to both be wrong. Right? Because there aren't differences. I'm sure there are some cultural differences, but fundamentally, the kids, the students in the US versus the students in Ireland, in the UK, in Australia, and New Zealand, they don't have a different brain makeup, do they? Sure, there are cultural differences, but by and large, there's not enough of a difference to account for the fact that students in the US shouldn't do exams, and students outside the US in the English-speaking world should do exams. There's nothing that makes one suited over the other. Don't you agree? So I think we're both wrong. I think the system I grew up in and the system you grow up in, whichever way it leans, are wrong. Because most places have a default. The default is to do exams, or the default is not to do exams. And that has to be wrong, because there has to be diversity in the students. That's just how I see it anyway. So quite a few years ago now, I really changed my studio and started seeing exams as an occasional thing for my students. It's a thing that I will suggest for a student when I think it would be beneficial for them, and I won't suggest it for every student. And even if a student does one this year, they're probably not going to do one next year. They might do it 2 years after that, or 3 years after that, and skip a few grades or skip around. Dipping in and out makes a lot more sense to me for the majority of students. So let me go through two of the pros before we go any further, because I think there are some false pros out there. The first one, which is often cited as a reason for wanting students to do exams, is motivation. Is this the reason you would have thought of? Or is it the reason you give? Or the reason you did them as a student? Or didn't do them? Motivation is a really poor reason to do exams, in my view. Because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. A lot of the time when we talk about doing exams for motivation, what we're talking about is taking a student who currently does not practice and putting them in for an exam in order to increase their motivation and get them to practice. Guess how well that goes. Have you ever had it go well if you've done that? I know I have done it myself. Like, I've been pushed by parents in the past, usually, that they think, oh, if we do an exam, that'll get them motivated. We need to get them moving. And it doesn't work. It sometimes semi-works in the short term. Even in the short term, it often backfires. But let's say it does work in the short term. They practice for this exam. And then what happens after the exam? Well, they do nothing because they were only working for this exam. They didn't find any internal reason. They didn't find any reason based on the music in order to practice. So they generally stop. Keep in mind, I'm talking about a student who didn't have a steady practice habit before we started the exam prep. So they practice for the exam, they stop after the exam. Parent thinks again, okay, they need another exam to make them practice. So a year later, 9 months later, they start preparing for another exam. They practice for that, they stop again. We continue on like this until they either lose motivation entirely, even within the exam system, or they get to grade 8 or grade 10, if that's what it is for you. They get to the last one. They finish it. What do you think they do now? Do they play for the rest of their life? No, they don't, because they were only doing it for an exam. Have you seen this in action? I know I have so many times. The even more likely case is that students are put in for an exam, they don't start practicing because they didn't have a steady practice habit to begin with, and so they have this miserable experience of a teacher nagging them every week because they are so stressed. It's so stressful, isn't it? When your student is not practicing and you have this exam on the horizon and they have no concept of time and you do. It's so stressful. So you're nagging them or doing everything you can to get them to practice, and they don't do anything until like a month before at the best, and then they try to cram it in, but we know that doesn't work for piano. So they scrape through the exam at best. Now, I've never had a student fail, which I think, based on some of my previous students, says more about the exam marking system. It's a very shallow grading field, I find. But it's still not a good experience to go through that and get the lowest level, right? To get the pass in our system, or the D, if that's what it is for you. So motivation is not the reason. Exams don't wake up non-practicing students and get them to practice. That's just my experience anyway. The other false pro that I see a lot is well-roundedness. So a lot of teachers might say, or even parents might say, or even students might say, that they want to do exams because it gives them a well-rounded education. Because it makes them learn not just their favourite types of music, but also pieces of the Baroque period and the classical period and scales and sight reading and oral. This seems logical until we realise that the exam syllabus is not supposed to be a curriculum. And if it was a curriculum, it'd be pretty narrow. It's missing lead sheets, chords entirely missing from our exam syllabus. Might not be from yours, but they vary. Improvisation, composing, and, music written after 1950, or maybe 1930 in many syllabi. So, are they well-rounded? No. But the bigger issue with this, and then I'll get down off my soapbox and we'll talk about some real pros. The bigger issue with this, for me, is not just that it's not well-rounded, it's that that's a poor excuse for planning. And I know this might sound a bit harsh, and I don't mean it to be like, you're a terrible teacher. It's not that at all. But if we really think it through, if we're just using exams because we think they give us this well-rounded curriculum, then couldn't we just plan that curriculum ourselves and make it truly well-rounded, whatever that means to us? Yes, we could. So the exam is not doing that for us. So, some real pros, real reasons why I do have students do exams, because I do. It's not something I'm entirely against, even though people sometimes think that about me. Self-confidence, I think, is a great pro of piano exams. If you have a student who is practicing pretty steadily, and they are ready for this level exam, but they don't really have a lot of faith in their own playing. Have you had students like that? I know I have, many times. I'd love to hear about your examples of them. For me, that student going in for that exam can be a huge confidence boost. They go in, they know that it's leveled in a certain way and that it's been planned out so that if they do these things, they are considered to be that level. And that's not always the best thing to need every, month of the year, but occasionally, as a confidence boost, that's wonderful. You can go in fully prepared, perform, and have that validation of an examiner coming back to you, someone who you know knows about music and isn't your teacher who, let's be honest, is very biased towards you because they like you as a person. Have someone unbiased come back and say, you did great. That feels good. And it is huge validation for students, and I think a great reason sometimes to do an exam. Another great reason, and a pretty common one in my studio, is that it helps students level up. So by this, I don't mean that the exam grade is a huge stretch goal, but I do like for the exam that a student goes in for to be like a half a grade above stuff they've played before. I don't want them to go in for a grade 3 exam having only played pieces that are basically a grade 1 level. That's setting them up for absolute misery and a very long exam preparation process, which is not what I want. But I do want them to go for the grade 3 when they've played pieces that are like just over grade 2 level, grade 2.5, if you can estimate what that is. So I do like it because it pushes them forward in that respect. But it also helps them level up in another way. It helps them level up their polishing skills. Does anyone have students who need that? I think this can be a weak area sometimes in my studio because I do like to get through a lot of repertoire. But sometimes we need to pause and really polish things. And exams and concerts help us to do that. They help us to stick with a piece for longer and really work on, refining the dynamics, getting them beautiful, shaping the phrases beautifully, getting the pedaling just right, maybe memorizing the pieces if that's something they want to do. So it helps us pause on those pieces and really polish them to a high shine. And that can really level up our students' skills when it's done occasionally. So I love exams for pushing students that little bit further with their leveling. And the final big pro for me, and there can be others, so do add your thoughts in, but I think it provides focus. And let me explain why I differentiate this from motivation. Motivation tends to be used as this, they need to get up and go, right? We need them to go, and they're not going, so we're going to try and motivate them. Whereas focus is that level of clarity. They do practice a bit harder, a bit more in the preparation, in the lead up to an exam, because they're focused on that date, on that preparation period, and on that particular set of pieces and scales and anything else they have to prepare. It does help focus the mind for that short period, and that is not a bad thing. Again, if they're already practicing, it often helps them increase their practice because they are so focused on that particular thing, and it can really boost their skills in that way. So let's talk about a couple of cons. Few pieces. This is the biggest one from my own exam experience. I did exams from about age 10, 11, which is kind of late. Like I didn't do them for the first 3 or 4 years of my studies in piano. But when I was about 11 or so, I went in for my first exam, and I did do them every year after that. And that meant pretty much doing 3 pieces for the whole year. For all of those years. Now I skipped the first few grades. So I skipped the first 2 and then I skipped a whole bunch more. So I did maybe 6 of the 11 grades that we have in our system. But for those 6 or 7 years, I just learnt 3 pieces a year. Now, I know my teachers tried to give me other repertoire, but I fell into that motivation issue. I'm very much someone who likes structure and order and that kind of thing. So when I'm working towards an exam, it just made sense to me, and that was what kept me going. And outside of that, it was really hard to find this get up and go to practice other pieces. There were some that kind of took my fancy, but in general, I did the exam pieces each year. So we can really cut down on the amount of repertoire students learn. And this is why I like to have on years and off years. Because on the on years, when we're doing an exam, a student can spend the 3 months that we do in my studio, not 9, but 3 months preparing those 3 pieces, polishing them to a high shine, and that's a really good experience. The rest of the year learning other stuff, because it's most of the rest of the year, right? Only 3 months of exam prep. And then the off year also exploring other stuff and going in different directions, still polishing the things that are for concerts, but not spending that chunk of time really focused on those 3 pieces. So we need diversity of repertoire in order for our students to become great readers, to just explore different music, honestly, for fun, and to get to find what really lights them up, what's going to keep them playing for the rest of their life. Because it might be Mozart, but it might not. And if we only do exams, we do get restricted into these genres. The next negative for me is the narrow syllabus. So, okay, let's take the syllabus that's most common, which is 3 pieces, sometimes 4. But let's say it's 3 pieces. There's a Baroque, a classical, and a romantic/contemporary list in most exam systems. Then you got your list of scales. Those things normally get done. Then you've got a oral work or ear training section with, on our exam, sight singing, although I know that's not as common, and singing back and clapping back, rhythm test, stuff like that. Then you've got sight reading, so a short piece of music that they have to sight read, and then you've got your theory test, right? So a few theory questions, normally just a few terms in ours. Okay, so you've got those things. So that is sort of broad. But the thing that makes it really narrow, beyond even leaving out the lead pages and the improv and all the other stuff that I love to teach, the thing that makes it really narrow is that we don't do those last things that I struggled to remember just there. We do the pieces and we do the scales. And then, 2 weeks before the exam, we panic and try and fit in the oral work, right? That's what happens in most teachers' studios, which makes it even narrower than it really is, because those oral tests, they're not a ear training curriculum. They're just supposed to be a general test. And we end up just preparing for the test rather than teaching the oral skills that are supposed to underlie those tests. There's nothing wrong with the tests. It's the fact that we should have skills that allow us to do those rather than just preparing for those specific tests. Does that make sense? So that is common, and that is totally understandable because it's really overwhelming to prepare all the different things. And it is especially overwhelming if you only have 30-minute lessons with your students, because that's just so much. And then if you top that up with a student who was not motivated and practicing before you started, and therefore is not practicing particularly well now, you're trying to practice in the lesson too, and then it becomes impossible. So I do understand, but I just think that is one of the drawbacks, is it ends up sort of closing us in on these few things we need to do to get enough marks out of this exam process for the student, and detracting from this idea of a broad curriculum. And the final one, demotivation. So we sort of talked about this in the false pro, but I just thought I would round out with this. Exams can be demotivating. They can be demotivating because your teacher is suddenly all stern and annoying, and you weren't practicing the whole time anyway, but now they're really stressed about it and they're unpleasant to be around, so that's demotivating. But also, if you go through the exam and you don't get a great result, what does that say to you? If you went into this exam process as a student who doesn't practice much, you already probably think, I'm not that musical, I'm not sure this is my thing. And then you get a terrible result, a lowish mark on the exam, and you say, yeah, I'm not musical. That's the conclusion that's logical to draw in your head. Of course, it's not logical because we know it's just practice. But with all the messages around them in society, that's what they're going to think. They're not musical. So they likely will quit because of that, if their parents let them. So that's not motivational, is it? They can actually go in the opposite direction. those are my thoughts about piano exams, the pros, the cons. I do like them. I really enjoy the process when I prepare students for them, but that's because I have these very strict rules with myself about who should and shouldn't do an exam and when I will prepare them and how we will do that preparation in 3 months, no more. And that makes it a really enjoyable, pleasant experience for us. I would love to hear your thoughts about exams though, so do add them into the comments. Alright, this is not based on any particular theme, time of year thing. I just saw the fox hat. I like the fox hat. That's the filter we went with. That's it. It kind of matches my glasses, doesn't it? I think that's part of the reason I love it. Super fun. Let me know if you have any questions. I would love to hear from you. You can just type a question or write it directly into the chat. Carrie said it's like you've been sitting in on my exam prep lessons. Yeah, mine too. Like, it's coming from my own experience. There's a reason I described that process, because that's what it's like for most. It was like that for me as a student. Not to blame my teachers, because then I was like that as a teacher too. It's just part of the way the setup is that it's really hard not to do it that way. Which is why I think we need to have these on-off periods so that we can teach the ear training skills, teach the sight reading skills, so that that is just a test of what they can already do rather than a thing we have to prepare for specifically with these like specimen tests. Yeah, if you are a member, by the way, and you're watching live, you can join me later on the huddle. You'll find a link in your email. You can still register for the Zoom link because I would love to see you there. And if no one has any questions, I'm going to wrap it up there. We are going to be on again next week. I nearly said year. I don't know why. We're going to be on again next week. Same time, same place. And I really hope you'll join me again then and bring along your teaching friends if you have some that you can connect with online or even sit in person and watch us together. And I hope to see you there. I hope you have a fabulous week. Bye for now.